and welcome to Doc Review with me, Camelia Shambayati. In this episode, we'll be reviewing Lo and Behold, Reveries of the Connected World, directed by legendary filmmaker Werner Herzog. And joining me in the studio today, we have Lee Singer, who is a film journalist and video essayist, whose work has appeared in major newspapers, magazines, and online outlets. He is also a program advisor for the BFI London Film Festival. And beside him, we have Kaleem Aftab, a film critic and freelance writer who writes mainly for the Independent newspaper. Now, Lo and Behold, Reveries of the Connected World is a documentary about how the internet has changed civilization and is constantly evolving. Herzog reveals the ways in which the online world has transformed how virtually everything in the real world works, from business to education and space travel to healthcare. However, he also explores the dark side of the internet and its social implications. Let's take a look at our first clip.
This is the birthplace of the internet.
Let's enter this very special place. That machine over there is the first piece of internet equipment. This is a military-hardened machine. It has a unique odor, and it was from here that the first message was sent. A revolution began.
The explosion of information technology on the internet has led to some of its greatest glories. Could this team beat the real Brazilian football team?
That is the goal, to have a team of soccer-playing robots defeat the FIFA World Champion.
In the forest, we met a modern-day hermit.
I became very ill from wireless radiation signals. As soon as I heard there was a place with no cell towers, I was here in 48 hours.
The internet is a manifestation of evil itself.
Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, is pursuing how we would talk to colonies on Mars via the internet.
I mean, right now, we can't even get one person to Mars, so clearly...
I would come along. I wouldn't have a problem.
We're going to have a revolution in our definition of what it means to be human.
Will our children's children's children need the companionship of humans? Or will they have evolved in a world where that's not important?
You could essentially, in the not-too-distant future, tweet thoughts.
Will there ever be an artificial intelligent machine that makes movies? Absolutely, yes. Will it be quite as good as yours? No one can even come close.
Of course not. Have the monks stopped meditating? They all seem to be tweeting.
Well, that was quite a spectacular clip and quite amusing at the end there. And welcome both of you to the show. Lee, if I can start with you, what was your general take on this film?
Well, I mean, I don't want to sum it up as Werner Herzog versus the internet, because there are some sort of positive aspects that he identifies, but very quickly it goes into where is this taking us, and it's probably not taking us to a very, healthy destination as a species. Werner Herzog is very renowned for his kind of quite merciless view on nature, on human relationships, and it was very interesting to see him sort of transplant those sort of ideas, and not preconceptions, but his slant towards that on a sort of technological basis.
Right, and Kaleem, what was your take on the film? Would you agree with what Lee said?
Mostly, yes, I'll agree with Lee, but I also thought, and the point that I most thought Lee was right was on that this isn't a film about the internet, this is a film about human civilization. This is a film about what we want from society and how society will change. I think one of the big points is that maybe our whole concept of what the world is will change because of how connected everything is, and the possibilities of us as humans.
It does get very abstract and philosophical indeed. And what other kind of questions does this documentary raise, and what does it make you think about?
The questions it raises are questions of how humans treat each other anyway now, with the way people troll each other, which is very unfortunate, the use of the internet to dissipate bad information as well as good. It also gave us questions of whether when we go space travel, also man versus machine, which has been a common theme from Arthur Clarke on, is a big part of this film.
Lee, did you find this film thought-provoking as well?
Very much so. I mean, you know, the internet it's like one of those fundamental game changers for civilization, because it changes the very way that we communicate. There's a great quote from one of the scientists in there. He says, you know, it used to be that the message that we used to say was as important as who we were delivering it to. And nowadays, it doesn't really matter. You know, you put something out there on Twitter, on Facebook, on one of the social media platforms, or even just through the internet, and you're not really that bothered sometimes
it does
where
have
it's
an
going.
immortalizing
Yeah,
effect,
and then so then
yeah.
that really changes how we relate to each other, because if I'm not talking to you personally and want to tell you something, it's very different if I'm just putting it out there and people all over the world could see it, how they respond. And I do think it's having a quite significant effect on just human, one-to-one relationships. Exactly.
Exactly. And we'll leave it there for now as we take a look now at our next clip from Lo and Behold, Reveries of a Connected World, that takes us to the birthplace of the internet.
One of the science buildings here is considered the birthplace of the internet. This picture of some of the scientists involved was taken at this very moment. The corridors here look repulsive, and yet this one leads to some sort of a shrine reconstructed years later when its importance had sunk in.
Let's enter this very special place. We're now entering a sacred location. It's the location where the internet began. It's a holy place, and we've just come back to 1969 when the critical events of the origin began. That machine over there is the first piece of the internet equipment ever installed. It's a mini computer which we now call a packet switch. This is a military hardened machine. You can't break it. And it was meant to sustain itself unattended for years at a time. This particular machine is so ugly on the inside, it is beautiful. It has a unique odor, a delicious old odor from all the old parts. It consists of modems, CPU, logic units, memory, power supply, all the things you need to make an efficient computer work. This machine served as the first node of the internet for decades. And it was from here that the first message was sent. A revolution began.
So it really wasn't that long ago since the internet emerged into this world. Kaleem, what kind of revolution was it then, the internet?
Well, it was firstly a revolution in communication, but it was also a revolution in terms of, like so many things, it started off as a military exercise. It started off as one military department wanting to speak to another, and then it morphed into something that no one really still knows where it's going to go, which is one of the emphases of the film.
And Herzog says in the film, quite interestingly, that the world of science fiction couldn't even foresee the internet, the emergence of it. So they could predict electric cars, wireless phones, video chats. Do you think that at the time anyone could predict how big of an impact it would have on our lives?
No, not really. I mean, because it is such a fundamental change of how we communicate and our ability to sort of reach so many people in one go, one tweet, one message or whatever. Even in the past when things like telephones came along, you would call another person. It could be on the other side of the world, but it's still that one-to-one thing. This is a completely different scenario.
Do you think that our lives are so dependent on the internet that we couldn't survive without it?
I think that's one of the points that he and actually some of the scientists make. We've got into this stage where, it's all about convenience, but that easily becomes complacency. And so now, so many of us, I don't know about you and your work, but certainly for my work, it'd be really hard to imagine. It's not impossible, but it would be so much more difficult to do the sort of work we do without it. And therefore, we get so easily reliant on these things. And we get a little bit sort of infantilized. It's like, how do we, if the electricity goes or the Wi-Fi's gone, you're like, what do I do?
Exactly.
This is crazy because it didn't exist that long ago.
I want to pick apart these sort of social implications in the next part. But Kaleem, I have to ask, Herzog says in the film that because the internet doesn't belong to a specific government or there's no laws, What kind of issues does this raise?
Well, that's the theory, right? But the internet's run by a certain amount of companies who have access to all of this information. And this is what the great debate is now because of all the spying that goes on from Russia to GCHQ to the Americans, looking at the data that's being passed around the world. So although it's not owned by everyone, that just also means it can be infiltrated by everyone. And it's become almost a weapon that's bigger than armaments.
So the emergence of the internet, then, would you say has given us less privacy?
I don't think it's just given us less privacy. I think it, harks back to the George Orwellian idea of Big Brother watching us. It's given us less privacy, but it's also given us more ability to communicate. So it's a double-edged sword. It's not one without the other.
And Lee, what did you make of the scene in the film of this family who experienced this devastating loss? Their daughter died in a car crash, but then the father found that the images of her dead body resurfaced online, and they're haunted by this, and they can't erase this.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's just a horrendous tragedy to have that loss and then have it, relayed back to you without any way to stop it. It shows how quickly there's no jurisdiction for some of these things. There's always a first case and someone pushes it, and then it's like, well, how do we police that? How do we control that? At the same time, I mean, this maybe it's a separate issue. It was interesting to see how Herzog dealt with it, because there was some very leading question. He had a very, that was one of those moments where he wanted to show how terrible that aspect of the internet was. And they're obviously a very traumatized family, but he definitely added some sort of very leading questions into pushing them into a certain, or not challenging. I think she says the internet's the Antichrist.
Yes,
he doesn't say
and
anything.
Evil.
And
yes.
it's like, well, there's obviously that capacity, but it's not only necessarily.
Do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, because also the way he puts the mise-en-scène, the way we see the images, they look like the Addams Family.
And
they're sitting there and they're straight and they're looking to us, and you think, when's da-da-da-da going to come on to the soundtrack?
It's very
It's very, very, it's a real message. It's powerful, and it just shows how, if you have command of the medium, you can really distort it.
It has that very eerie feel indeed. But for now, we're just going to take a look at another clip from the documentary, which shows us how technology could change the future of sports.
That is the goal of RoboCup. That is by 2050 to have a team of soccer-playing robots which can defeat the FIFA World Champions, and we'll see it happen. I'm very hopeful that we'll actually get a team of robots which are competent enough and smart and intelligent enough to actually beat the world champions in 2050.
Better than Messi, Ronaldo, and Neymar.
It sounds difficult, but we can get there. We can get there. We have a certain reverence for Robot 8. I mean, to us, saying Robot 8 is equivalent to someone saying Messi or Ronaldo or something. It's the same. This here is Robot 8. It's very identifiable because its pattern includes 4 green dots on top, and it's one of our favorites, actually.
Beautiful. Do you love it?
Yes, we do. We do love Robot 8.
I think that has to be one of the geekiest moments in the whole film. And I think in that scene, Herzog is showing us that through the technology might eventually overtake human beings and replace inspirational people such as athletes like Ronaldo and Messi. How worrying do you think that is, or is that quite exciting?
I mean, replace is an interesting choice of word. I think what they want to do is, you can see from the clip, that young inventor, he's so excited by this that the actual implications are not really the forefront of his mind. It's just, can we do this? And then literally falling in love with that sort of, not particularly aesthetically beautiful piece of hardware. But I guess where these things, I mean, it's all speculation, but where you can posit these things going is a kind of synthesis of machines with humans, and lots of sci-fi talks about that. It's merging man with machine, because having, the idea of a match, 11 humans versus 11 of those things, I can more imagine enhanced versions of, people using or wearing some sort of, armor or whatever to go with it. But yeah.
So you're saying that technology should be there to help improve our lives rather than take over our lives. Kaleem, what kind of future do you envision then of that? Where do you draw the line? Are you comfortable with the pace that technology is moving?
Well, on that point, I think it matches the whole chess thing, where there was a whole idea of can a chess machine beat the best world player, and then Deep Blue beat Kasparov. But it made no difference because we're not interested in watching machines play against humans. We're interested in humans playing humans and humans making mistakes and the artistry of it. So when I see that, I go, oh yeah, there's lots of little robots playing the ball to each other in similar patterns, but where is the uniqueness? Where's the art in it? Where's the thing that makes it human, that makes it beautiful? And that doesn't exist. So I'm not worried about technology in that way. And whether it's moving fast or not is neither here nor there, because we're going to have to cope with it at the pace that it moves.
Despite all the glorious achievements that technology has given us, I guess it's not without its social implications and its negative effects. In the film, we see an example of a baby that starved to death due to her parents, the baby's parents, neglecting the child because they're busy playing video games. And we see the issues of of internet addiction, where there's rehab centers and people experiencing health problems. What did you make of the darker consequences of the internet in this film?
Well, I mean, one of the experts says it very explicitly. He's like, the weakest link in any of this stuff is always the human element. So you talk about, you know, the addicted people. It's like you put a game out there. If some person allows themselves or is unable to resist that sort of constant thing and neglects, for example, in this case, their child, the human element is the thing. I think this is the whole thing. It's like you create these, you know, systems, these, you know, events, these things that people can enjoy or use. It's always going to come back to how do human beings deal with those things? Do they, you know, limit their sort of involvement, or do they just sort of surrender to it? And then that's where the sort of the negative connotations can come in.
And Kaleem, how well do you think Herzog explored the darker consequences of the internet and technology?
I think he explores it really well, but he also takes it even further in terms of the reveries. He's asking, does the internet have a consciousness? Because we as humans still don't understand consciousness in the greatest of ways. And if that's the case, will that then be a threat to humanity? And that's the darkest threat. I think the rest of it, he's just showing how the human, as Lee said, the human side is not very good at dealing with new things.
And another point that he picks up on is the idea that humans, because they become complacent, as you said, that we'll lose creative thought and imagination. Is that a genuine concern as well? I think the biggest concern that I saw, and one of the scientists says it, is our ability to actually interpret information is losing out. We've got so much information, everything's at our fingertips, that we just look at the facts, but we don't interpret the facts. And people, as we've seen already in the modern world and in the recent elections, have been great at interpreting the facts and manipulating them to give the message that they want, and that's really dangerous. And would you agree with that?
Absolutely, no. I mean, again, it all comes down to, you have these things out there, how do we use them? And also, who's in charge of shaping those things? So this whole idea of, for example, following Kaleem's thing, fake news. If a certain group of people have a specific agenda and they're able to sort of mass disseminate this kind of stuff, it's really, you know, incumbent on us to try and interpret this stuff and actually not just take everything at face value. But when you're faced with so much information, that can be more of a challenge, I guess.
Indeed. So let's just take a break there for now as we take a look at our final clip, which shows Werner Herzog, director of, lo and behold, Reveries of the Connected World, speaking at an event held by the Producers Guild of America, where he talks about his concerns for mankind because of the internet.
Personally, I think he's right, that looking at what we have, what we are doing right now, how many we are, how our attitudes about consuming things are out there, and many other things, the fragility of the internet, which could exterminate pretty much the entire human race, because we are not hunter-gatherers anymore. So in 1,000 years from now, probably he's right that there will be a very, very delicate and critical phase. So, in a way, my films, or this film that you just saw in my next documentary that's almost finished, somehow are going hand in hand although they are very, very different in subject.
Herzog talks about the fragility of the internet there in that clip we just saw, that somehow if the internet was to be wiped out, that the humankind, the human race, wouldn't be able to survive. Would you agree with this theory, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really just the internet, it's technology. You know, as we've sort of touched on already, we're so dependent on it, we're so surrounded by it, we are really, you know, it's not just something that exists outside of us, it's the way we live today. And if, you know, some catastrophic event comes and that's no longer with us or available, you know, Herzog is he's very big on this idea of hunter-gatherers and authenticity and people who actually can fend for themselves. I think there's many generations that have come now that are not really, you know, working the way that he would, you know, say we need to be able to survive independently. We're so enmeshed in this technology.
Kaleem, do you think that's a bit far-fetched? Do you think would be that without technology we reset to caveman times?
I do think it's a bit far-fetched because I think we've also moved on and the information we've gathered and our ability to communicate with each other has changed. I think what Herzog says is right, and there is this fear of man versus humans and what can we do without this technology. But I think we can survive. We've survived, we've evolved, we'll find new ways of surviving. And that, I think, is the balance that we don't know. So you could either say it will be a scary thing or, as history has shown, humans will adapt to it.
And in that clip we just watched, Herzog raises the issue of humans need to consume, that we sort of, I guess, alluding there to that we live in a capitalist world and that we always need instant gratifications. And I think technology has helped us in that regard. Is that detrimental to society, these attitudes that are happening and that we're learning because of technology?
Well, I mean, on one hand, there's so many positives that, you know, for example, if I need to try and find something out, there are so many ways, you know, there's the hive mind idea. You put something out there, you might get help from a number of people that you would never have dreamed of, and it can actually be it can build community, it can actually, you know, help advance something. But of course, the other side of that is we do just take things for granted. We just assume something is going to come along, we're going to be able to access something, find out something, and it does kind of, again, it just this whole complacency comes in very, very quickly.
And Kaleem, what do you think about these clinics, these rehabilitation centres that are offered to these kids who are addicted to the internet?
Well, I think they're great, obviously, because if you're addicted to something and you need to pull off, then a rehabilitation centre, if it works for you, is a great way of weaning you off. If you feel that you've become so addicted, it's affected your life. Whether they always work or not, that's, again, up to the individual and the human element of it.
And Lee, would you say then, final word to you, that the internet is a gift or a curse?
I mean, it's both. You know, I would like to try and look at it in a more positive way than I think overall the film does. I mean, he throws up some really important and interesting kind of warning signs, and without a doubt, they're things that we have to pay heed to. But, you know, as Kaleem's also touched on, there is the possibility to sort of build a more positive, you know, outlook and future. But it does depend on individuals being more aware of what they're consuming, the way that they, you know, use this stuff. And that's what will then make it more a positive thing, you know, more a blessing than a curse, I guess.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there and end it on that note. Thank you very much to both of you for coming on the show. And that's it for this episode of Doc Review. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find us on @DocReviewShow. That's @DocReviewShow. Do let us know your views on today's film, and you can even suggest a documentary that you would like us to review. I've been Camilla Shambayati, and see you on the next episode of Doc Review.